Welcome to Tea Time Chats with the Emerging Market Institute. I am Abhishek Banerjee, a second year student and also an EMI fellow. It's my distinct pleasure today to introduce two of our stalwarts of the Emerging Market Institute. To my right is Anne Migu, the faculty fellow at Emerging Market Institute and also former director of technology at the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development in Geneva. And to my left is Professor Lourdes Casanova. She's a Gail N. Robb Canizares Director of the Emerging Market Institute. She's also the faculty in the School of Management, and she is also a noted speaker and an expert on emerging market issues. Today, I'm in conversation with Anne and Professor Lourdes to discuss the Emerging Market Institute report, which was released during the Emerging Market Institute conference held on the 8th of November. So we're going to start with some basic facts about this report, which is the fourth Emerging Market Institute report. So I'll open the questioning by asking Professor Lourdes about what are the key findings of the report.
So the Emerging Markets Institute explores the rise of companies headquartered in emerging markets in the global 500 of Fortune. So we look at the rise in size, the rise in numbers. So this year, 119 companies from China, and then also a number of companies from Korea, Brazil, Mexico, Russia are present in the ranking. The tremendous success is companies from China, and we explore as well where do the companies invest. In previous years, we looked at mergers and acquisitions. These years, looking at the FDI markets database, we looked at greenfield investments. And in greenfield investments, China invests mainly in Indonesia, 9%, and then the US, 8%. However, the US, the most important country of destination, is China. So we see two very intertwined economies. Also, before I go on, I have to say that this is the result of a research team, and we are very grateful to Daniel Dos Anjos, Eudes Lopez, Jennifer Lehman, who have been instrumental to make the report possible. And of course, last but not least, my co-author, Anne Miru, who comes from the World Investment Report experience and brings the rigor and the experience of her work at the UNCTAD. So, Anne, maybe you can complement a little bit?
Yes, well, so as Lourdes said, we have a number of chapters which really show the rise of emerging market multinational. Of course, China is the leader, so sometimes that biases a little bit the picture. We also look at, because emerging market multinational, especially from China, they are, if you want, they are linked to the growth of the economy. We also look at how China has been doing, and we highlight the characteristics of the economy, which make China a heavyweight worldwide. And in addition to these three chapters, we also have contributions from a number of authors. We have a chapter on China and the role of state institution. We have a chapter on Mexican multinationals. We also have a chapter on social innovation in Latin America, and a last one from the OECD on the Sustainable Development Goals and what that means in the context of an emerging market multinationals.
Great. I think that's really great points brought up. So I'm going to move the conversation a little bit forward. So Professor Lourdes, if you can talk a little bit about who are the intended audience of this report and why should they find value in picking this report up?
Yeah. Academics sometimes get a little bit too much into depth of a particular issue. And we thought with the report, we thought a couple of things. One is that the Institute needed a voice on a subject. And the subject was emerging multinationals, because both Anne and I were experts on the field, had done a lot of work. That's number one. Number two is that the students also at the EMI fellows in the Institute wanted to have, we are in a business school, so the object of a study is, in a natural way, the emerging multinationals. Then, as well, a wide audience, practitioners who work in emerging markets, consulting firms, investment bankers, and also multinationals. And as I said before, so sometimes academics, we go in depth in a particular subject. Here, the idea was to take a step back and look at the broader picture. So who is winning from emerging markets? So the rise of emerging markets on the economic side has been explored, and we explored it with a list of the E20, the biggest 20 emerging markets, but also we wanted to take a look at the rise of companies from those markets that has not been that researched till now. And taking this a step back, we look at the panorama of this.
Right. You want to add something?
No, I mean, that's exactly it. We want to look at the emerging market multinational phenomenon with a very concrete perspective. That's why, as Lourdes says, we have a lot of corporate statistics, and we also lack very much, case studies, but several case studies, so you have a global picture.
Right.
Yeah.
I think as you were speaking, Professor Lourdes, about this report and who finds the most value in it, one thing that probably our audience want to understand is that what was the methodology of coming across with this report, right? If you can shed some light on that.
So we look at databases. Databases do not cover very well the emerging markets for a number of reasons. One, because there are quite a few state-owned companies. There are also quite a few private companies. They don't release the data in the same way that a public company has to release, a publicly traded company has to release the information for their shareholders. So that's one of the problems. However, we see Standard & Poor's, Capital IQ, Bloomberg, and also FDI Markets. So these three databases have made a tremendous effort. We also have FactSet. So these four databases, and definitely a Fortune Global 500. So it becomes like an honor for companies to be there in the Global 500 of Fortune. And that is voluntary released information from the companies to Fortune. So these databases have been at the heart of our research and allow us a panorama of the situation with the caveats that there are companies that are not covered in these databases, but still they give us a relatively good picture of the situation.
Great. I think I just want to shift the conversation now to something about what's there in the report. And you talked about the fact that this report is an attempt to give a panoramic view of what the emerging markets situation is really. So apart from the BRICS nation, we have all heard a lot about BRICS nation. What are the other next 2-3 countries which in your mind are coming up as the next big destination or next big hope in the emerging market space?
That's a very tricky question because by definition, an emerging market, one of the main characteristics is its vulnerability to external factors in a way. So we look a lot, by definition, looking at the data, you are led to consider Asian countries. So definitely Malaysia, Indonesia are definitely countries which have a lot of, I would not say growth potential because it's a little presumptuous to have that kind of assessment now, but actually from the data. And in Africa, for instance, of course, you have Nigeria, which is in our group of countries, but there are also smaller in size economy, like Kenya, for instance, which is not in our basically sample, but which is also a very promising economy. The point, perhaps the most striking issues that or element that we found in the report is not only through emerging market multinational, but also through growth prospect and innovation effort, is that we see that Latin America in almost all the elements and parameters we are looking is clearly lagging behind. So that is definitely so. If you are asking me, in that region, we would have kind of difficulty to find. For the time being, let's always be hopeful.
Absolutely. And Professor Lourdes, you talked about the fact that this report is kind of comprehensive and there's a big panorama that we have tried to cover. And we heard from Anne about the next countries that the world is probably looking at. Is there any 2-3 major takeaways from this report that you want to highlight specifically going forward?
So the first one is that the coming of age of emerging multinationals, mainly from China and Korea. Both countries have worldwide companies, both in their international footprint as well as the innovation capabilities. When you think about innovation, you think about Samsung, you think about Huawei, a company all the time in the news. If you look at statistics of how much these companies invest in research and development, these companies are up there. You also think of Ping An, an insurance company that was featured this year in Fortune, the biggest private company from China in the Global 500. You think also of the banks, ICBC, Bank of China. You think of Tencent, WeChat Pay, Alipay, Alibaba. This country, Alipay, and the financial arm of Alibaba. These companies are up there, and also other companies that have fallen behind, as Anne was saying. Latin America has seen and is seeing a lot of turmoil, but you have companies like Petrobras that are coming out as reinforced after the past crisis, and also spur innovation and pull small and medium-sized companies from their own countries to become much more bigger and much more innovative and much stronger. So these companies are State Grid, 2018 second biggest company in the world by revenues, electricity company, with this project of creating the World Wide Web in electricity. So definitely these companies are there to stay, and are formidable competitors for a number of reasons. One, because they compete on price. They always offer products and services at a lower point prices than the traditional Western multinationals, because they see risk in a different way than established multinationals, because they adjust quite well. They are able to change their business models. They also understand internationalization as a learning process. And because of that, as I said, they are much more flexible. So these companies are there. They are there to compete and will change the way we teach in business schools. We have to incorporate case studies from these new companies. You are about to start your career. You will consult. You are going to consulting. You will consult with these companies. You will be, these companies will be your clients, your competitors, and definitely will be there and are here to stay.
Right. I think that's a great perspective on kind of how the companies from emerging markets are looking to break through into the world, so to say. Now, there's a lot that we can discuss about this report and what's going on in emerging markets, but because of paucity of time, the last question that I want to pose to both Anne and you is that going forward, what do you think is the vision of this report, and what are some of the topics, maybe speculative at this point, that you think are topical from this report standpoint to cover?
There are a couple of questions that which are in the pipeline, which are in a way also very difficult to study. We have mentioned innovation. We have worked a lot this year and past year on innovation in emerging markets, looking a lot at China. So in a way, this is a bias. What are the innovation efforts, and what are countries and companies doing in emerging markets beyond China and Korea? That's question number one. We would like to continue working on that. I'm sure there are interesting cases, but are these isolated cases, or do they, represent a real trend worldwide in those economies? That's a big question, and we don't have the answer. And the other one is taking a global perspective, and with my United Nations background, we talk a lot about the corporate and social responsibility of enterprises. And this always with having in mind very often developed country enterprises. How is this issue conceived perceived, how is the issue dealt with in an emerging market context. There are efforts done within the UN, including in my former organization, UNCTAD, or in other areas in New York in the UN, but still there is not a coherent and systematic approach to see what's going on. And that's very challenging, but given that these companies are the companies of tomorrow, I think we have a lot to do on that. And that's an angle we would like to explore in the future.
Right.
Also, next year will be the 5th anniversary of the report. It's a miracle because, as I said, it's a tremendous teamwork effort. We have a great research team who supports the report. Also, great colleagues from the Emerging Markets Research Network, Professor Moacir Miranda de Oliveira from University of Sao Paulo, and Fernanda Caen from FEI, Beneta Andonova, Dean of the School of Administration at Universidad de los Andes, Juana Garcia, who is also a professor and now visiting scholar at Harvard, Professor Anabela Davila from Tec de Monterrey. From China, we have had collaborations with Wenzhou University and also with Wuhan University this year, and also with Tsinghua University, and Professor Tao Chen, and Professor Ravi Ramamurthy has been helping us with the report tremendously. And next year we'll celebrate the 5th anniversary with the OECD Development Center and all the colleagues from the Emerging Markets Research Network, and Professor Andrew Caroli, who was the founder with Professor Yaru Chen of the EMI Institute, which will celebrate in 2020 the 10th anniversary. So there will be a time to look back and to explore these new questions that Anne was mentioning. So looking back at this new world and in this new competitive landscape that is not the same of the competitive landscape of just 10 years ago before the pre-financial crisis. So this has been a phenomenon that has been changing and rising the numbers in just the last 10 years. The global financial crisis of 2008 was the springboard used by many emerging multinationals to become global. So this new phenomenon will be explored with the questions that Anne was saying, with the help of the network and the internal great research team at EMI and the databases that we are very grateful to these organizations for updating also these databases that are very helpful to look at the broad panorama. So thank you very much, Abhishek.
Great. On that note, thank you so much, Anne. Thank you so much, Professor Lourdes, for taking the time out. Looking forward to the great work that EMI does going forward. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.